Hello everyone. Now I'm going to be presenting the paper entitled Detecting Predation Interaction Using Pre-trained Convolutional Neural Networks by the author Gabriel, that's me, Charles, and Rafael. So before I start the presentation, I'd like to bring an overview of what we're going to be talking in here that are the introduction with some reviews of these contexts and state of the art talking about the methods that are commonly used in these specific contexts, and then we go through our method, the results, discussion, and the conclusions of our experiments. So before start out talking, I would like to bring a picture from Amazon forest. And is that for a reason? I would like to answer that question, why to study predation? Because as the paper is entitled Detecting Predation, we need to know why it's important and why use machine vision techniques on it, why it's important, and these images can clarify that question. Well, when you see individually, when you look to each individual and why they need to predate, why they need to make this interaction, the answer comes in terms of energy. I need energy, I need to acquire that. And for that reason, I need to pray or to make the predation, sorry, I need to go for praise. So for that, the source of energy starts with that picture. I start with the photosynthesis. So the photosynthesis will build the ATP and will build all the carbonic structure that will be the basis, for example, that eagle to fly. So in the food chain, of course, the eagle going to be the predator and will make that interaction to acquire more energy. So when we think for one individual, it's important in terms of getting energy. But if you change the scale and if you look in a different perspective, well, and try to explain the same question, try to answer the same question with a different scale, we see the food web structure. Well, the food web structure is a different representation of that interaction and a bigger scale in a way that we can see each species that are interacting in an environment, for example, the Amazon forest, or that picture that I bring to you in a marine scenario, for example. So we can see the interactions, the feeding interaction or the predation by the arrows to each species that are there in that environment. And then we try to look at the keystone species that are the most important in terms of maintaining the equilibrium. So we have some individuals that by predating, they quite help the maintenance of the others. So we have some relations in different species and that help us to have an equilibrium of that ecosystem. So as biologists, we like to see and understand that interaction, understand more the environment that we look in. So as is important, we need to identify it. So we have two perspectives, and I'm bringing two main perspectives to look at it. We can say that genetic and perspective and the chemical perspective are the most common used in this context. That basically they take the physics of the individual and they analyze what the diet is composed of. So we use the genetic, taking the DNA, fingerprinting, or different methodologies to try to figure out what animals are in that diet, or you can look using chemicals, isotopes, to try to figure out the same thing. So just using a different perspective, but they are expensive. So for that we can make a different way of looking at these interactions, that is using images. You can take images, for example, the camera trap imaging that is commonly used, that we take that camera there, and if the animal passed in front of it, you take a picture. So would it be interesting to get these images or get the interaction itself and grab it and make analysis for it, and automatically we'll say that is a predation event or an unpredation event. So for that, we came with the object of the paper, that is, implement an algorithm able to detect predation in different animal scale, different animal taxa, sorry, mainly for carnivore mammals, and also visualize these predation events, seeing what our algorithm are looking at in the picture. So we have a state of the art that represent the most studies in deep learning applied to ecology, that they're represented, for example, in species identification, classification, disease detection, and also diversity studies. And the most used algorithm in this context for the convolutional neural networks and the recurrent neural networks, they are the mainly used in this context. But when you go into ecological interactions, the scenario changed, and changed in some terms, in a way that we have ecological interaction studies, but they are focused mainly on arthropods, just one taxa. And we have it, well, for several reasons, because they are easy to manipulate and to study these interactions, such as plant-pollinator interaction, competition, cooperation, predation, and also scavenging. They used to use the arthropod taxa that's easy to manipulate, and for that they use YOLO convolutional neural networks, for example, neural networks, and also other CNN techniques for that to identify these interactions. And finally, with this state of the art, we go to our methods. So we used to collect a data set that was to build the data set that I'm showing in that picture that I'm showing to you. We used a web scraping algorithm that was based on Python and Selenium, basically, that we grab 170 images and we split into training sets, test set, and validation sets. And then we have 70, 60, and 40 images for each one of those. And it's important to say that each training set are half predation class and half non-predation class to all the sets that I showed you. And we bring that pictures and start of training a method, training an algorithm that we choose, that is the pre-trained VGG16 architecture as an architecture of the convolutional networks. So for that, we bring the picture here, for example, that cheetah, of a picture of 150 size, and then we go through the VGG16 architecture, and up to here we have the well-known VGG16 with the parameters trained with the ImageNet dataset. Well, we choose that dataset because they already have many animals, species, and pictures there with the different species, a lot of there, that helped us, and we imagine that will be a general map to grab that patterns that will appear in this problem in here. So after having this architecture, we have the deep, the densely connected layer in here. After we add a dropout, and then we add another densely connected layer with a sigmoid in the end. So using this structure, we would like to make the performances of it. And then we compute the accuracy, the recall, the F1, and precision. And for all of these parameters, we train it 30 times using 30 epochs, and then we compute the average of each times. So we take the 30 epoch for each times that we trained, and then we take an average for all the parameters, okay? And to see what the CNN are looking at, we take the gradient weighted class activation mapping for it. And then we look at each channel of the picture as classified as predation, and then we look which are the activations looking by this methodology, and we see what the CNN are looking at in the channels, okay, as this class. So when we go to results, we have an average training accuracy of 100%, and for all the other parameters we have to 100%. But when we go to the validation section for these parameters, we have an average accuracy of 60%, a precision of 62.8, a recall of 60%, and F1 61.4%. Well, therefore, these represent that we have, using that small data set, that was hard to acquire, mainly we're even using these algorithms that we built in Python, was hard to have that general predation detector. So it is a challenge to have that general predation detector. Meaning when we see the validation data set with the overfitting that happened, but this is a pilot study and it shows the feasibility of using that architecture of a convolutional neural network to detect predation. So we could detect predation, so it shows the feasibility, meaning for a different taxa. A different taxa, when we look at the state of the art, that the common one was the arthropods. So now we go into bigger mammals and carnivores mainly. So when we look at these interaction in action, as this one, we have that the graph can show us the most important parts of the picture that the VGG16 are looking at. So, for example, we have the interaction between the cheetah and the prey here, that the proximity of the individuals are very important for that reason. So the heat map here shows an interesting picture. So we can actually visualize this feature extraction based on that methodology. And we look in this interaction as a guide to see what's happening inside of the algorithm. It's really interesting. And we can also say some mainly conclusions of that visualization and that results related with the VGG16. So we actually show the feasibility, we showed the feasibility of applying the deep learning techniques, mainly the VGG16 methods for these datasets, for that reason, to apply into predation. And also, it is an optimistic scenario for that, mainly using animals with different taxa as the carnivores that I mentioned. And in here, that I come back to the first image that I showed you, that is the Amazon forest. And then I conclude that, well, would be interesting to apply the camera traps in that forest, in the Amazon forest, take the pictures, actually have the pictures of that interaction, and be using that food web automatically. Look into each individual in that ecosystem and having these solutions. So we aim here and we showed the feasibility, but in future works we want to expand, of course, help in terms of the accuracy and the precision for the validation, make some implementations with more images, and go to videos as well. So I end the presentation with these further works that we aim to do, and I'm going to show you the references right now. And thank you so much for your attention, and thank you for that opportunity. And I guess we have 5 minutes of discussion, so thank you again.